In this video, I'm going to go over what's new in the CSM 6.3.11 release. As you can see, there's 7 new features. Excited about all of them, and we're going to go through each of those in detail. All right, so the first one is a customer request involving allowing larger volumes for flash copy targets, as well as safeguarded copy recovery volumes. All right, so what does this mean? So flash copy, today, you have the source and targets have to be the same size. And the reason why they have to be the same size is the CSM session supports restoring the targets back to the sources, right? Because that's what flash copy's for. You want to take that backup and restore it if you need to. Well, with this use case, the customer, what they really want is to be able to use flash copy for migration. So they have a small volume, they want to flash it on the same system to a larger volume and migrate the data that way. Well, they can't do that because today in CSM because we enforce that source and target size. And so what we did was in 6.3.11, we created a new session we call flash copy migration. If you create this session, as you go through that copy set wizard, we bypass that check and we allow you to add targets that are of a larger size now. So you can set this up. All the same options are available, and you'll be able to issue that flash to those larger volumes and do their migration. All right, for safeguarded copy, it's a little bit different. So for safeguarded copy, what they wanted was larger recovery volumes, but you don't want that typically in your main session. So say you have a safeguarded copy session with 1,000 volumes in it, 1,000 sources, and you're backing those up at some 4-hour interval or something like that. Well, those all need a static set of recovery volumes still, so you'll need 1,000 different recovery volumes just in case you need to do a catastrophic recovery. So what that means is you need to replace all the data across all the volumes and restore that backup to the sources. However, the request here was more for a forensic type, for a piecemeal surgical type recovery. So what does that mean? That means they were able to, there was a cyber attack, but it only affected certain data sets. So they only needed to restore certain data sets and not the entire set of volumes, nor all the data across all the volumes. So to do this, you can do that in CSM by creating a new safeguarded copy session and adding a subset of the volumes from the big session into the smaller session. So if, again, we had 1,000 volumes in the main session, you could, and only 5 of them had the data sets that were corrupted. You could create another CSM safeguarded copy session with those 5 volumes. CSM will discover those existing backups, and you'd be able to do a recover on those volumes. Well, how does the larger recovery volumes come into effect? Well, what the customer wanted was to be able to have a pool where you have a larger set of a pool with a small set of volumes with a larger size, such that that larger size could cover the recovery for any of the volumes in the big session. So you'd create a pool with 5 volumes that are much larger, so that whenever you can automate the creation of this second safeguarded copy session, and then just grab the volumes from the pool as the recovery volumes, recover from them, do your surgical recovery, your surgical restore for the data sets, delete that recovery, and delete the session. So you're back in business. So it allows you to have a pool of a set of recovery volumes that could be used for any of the volumes for a surgical type recovery. All right, the next feature is another idea from a customer based off of our ESESizer and safeguarded copy sizer sessions. So these sessions, if you're not familiar with them, they're designed to help you to size your capacity for, in particular, safeguarded copy backup capacity. Now, the ESESizer does let you size for your safeguarded copy recovery or ESE flash copy targets, but the primary use case is typically your safeguarded copy backup. With that said, customers didn't like the configuration, because when you added copy sets into either of these session types, while you could select multiple volumes in an LSS, if you wanted to select volumes in a different LSS, you'd have to loop back through the wizard for each LSS that you want to add to the session. And in reality, most of these configurations that are being using this have multiple LSSs with all the volumes in the LSS. So what we did is in 6.3.11, we added the ability to select at an LSS level. So as you can see in the picture, you'll choose a box, and then the next box will no longer be a drop down of the LSSs, but a select box of the LSSs. So you'll be able to control click, shift click, and choose multiple LSSs that will be added to the session. Now with that said, if you select multiple LSSs, all volumes in all LSSs selected will be added to the session. So it's a much faster way to add multiple LSSs, but all volumes in those LSSs will be added as well. So hopefully this helps you configure these ESESizer and SGCSizer sessions much faster, much easier, and get you started. All right, the next idea and feature we want to talk about involves the fact that starting with the CSM 6.3.9 release and the DS8000 9.4 microcode level, there are sessions in CSM that will now have multiple role pairs with active global mirror. So, such as the multi-target global mirror session, 2 role pairs may actually be forming consistency groups at the same time, or at least set up with global mirror masters that we need to track and manage. So in previous releases, you only have one. So when you go to the Global Mirror Info tab, you'd see the one set of data. Pretty easy to figure out which one was active, because there's only one in that particular mode you're in, and you're good. But now with the multiple, in the Global Mirror Info tab, you'd see the 2 side by side. And while you could look at the session IDs and map them back to the top where it says the H1J2 consistency group or the H1J3 consistency group, you could see which of the data is and map it back to the session IDs. It wasn't a quick way to tell. So what we added was where those arrows are, there's now a role pair. It specifically lists which role pair we're displaying the Global Mirror Info for. So you can see how many consistency groups are forming or what the state is on the hardware through this tab, and know which role pair we're talking about. So all of this makes it a lot easier to view and see status for Global Mirror in these environments that have multiple. All right, the next one I want to talk about is support for LDAP on z/OS RACF. All right, so CSM has had basic user and LDAP support for quite a while, but now we have a way to configure LDAP so that it's pointing to an LDAP server running on z/OS with what they call an SDBM backend. So on z/OS, you can set up an LDAP server now with that SDBM backend that is connected to RACF. So what does this mean? This means that the same users that you have defined in RACF to manage all your mainframe, your z/OS users, all that stuff, can be defined in CSM. So if you set this up, you'd be essentially pointing, you can run it on HMC, Windows, or whatever CSM may be running there. You can still now, with this mechanism, tie into your RACF set of users and use RACF as your authentication mechanism for CSM. So no longer would you have to have an Active Directory server or another off server like an LDAP server that has a separate set of users than your RACF users. You can manage all the users in one place. If you want to set this up, you'll have to have LDAP server running on Z. Obviously, there's a little bit of setup there, but also when you go into it, you'll have to go into the Advanced tab versus the Basic tab for the LDAP setup. And we have a set of XML you can copy and paste, and then change the variables based off of your particular environment. And once you do that, you'll be able to add RACF users. One note here is when you do this, on some systems, when you hit the test button, so after you've added the XML and you hit the test button, it may come back saying no users. This is actually because the wildcard we use doesn't always work for some z/OS environments. And so it might say no test users. If you see that, go ahead and save it, and then go into Add Users. Click the Add Users button to add users, and look it up and see if any users come back using, like say the whatever wildcard or filter you want to use there. See if the users come back, because it may be configured correctly. All right, the next feature is related to DS8000 connections. So today, CSM has a constant connection to the DS8000, and we do that using a user ID and what I'll call static password. So we need that password so that anytime we disconnect and reconnect or restart and try to reconnect to the DS8000, we're using that authentication user ID and password to authenticate and be able to have that constant connection. Well, with ever-growing security concerns, etc., customers have a lot of password rules now, such as needing to change their passwords every so often, or even some environments never ever having the same password, always having a rolling password. And so static passwords they don't really like, or if you have to change it often, it becomes quite cumbersome because you have to go into the CSM server and change it for all DS8000s across all the connections or CSM servers you may have. So DS8000 now has support for what they call ZOS Passtickets. So what is ZOS Passticket? So it's with RACF, you can define a user for Passtickets, which gives the user what they call Passticket key. That key is a long string that can be entered now into CSM in place of the password, along with the application name. In this case, it would be the LDAP server job name, so like LDAP SRV. And when CSM goes to connect, we use that key and the application name as well as a timestamp to create what they call a pass ticket. So anytime we send authentication to the DS8000, we're sending a unique pass ticket. It's never the same thing. It's always a new pass ticket that gets sent, gets authenticated based off the key and the time and the user, and we'll come back and we'll be connected. So no longer will there be need to go in and change this regularly. It's always rolling password. It's time-based, so after a certain period of time, pass ticket built. If somebody intercepted that somehow, which is we use SSL connections, so you shouldn't be able to intercept it. But say it got intercepted, that pass ticket wouldn't be usable again in about 60 seconds. I think is the default, which I think can be redefined. So on the RACF side, so this helps with a lot of the security needs now. Although it does require you to set up your DS8000 using the ZOS LDAP with the RACF LDAP with the SDBM backend. So in the last feature, I talked about how to set that up with CSM. DS8000 already supports that. When they went to native LDAP, they added that support as well. So you will need to set up DS8000 with that to get this pass ticket support. But once you do, this will help prevent you from having to change those passwords constantly. You can set it up with Passtickets and authenticate. The only thing I'll add is that because of the dual HMC connections and the possibility of multiple CSM servers or DSCLI or whatever using the same user and a pass ticket authentication for automation, you'll need to, when you set up the pass ticket for the user, disable they recommend that when you set that up to make it a one-time password, so you can never be used more than once. But you'll have to disable that on the RACF side. It will still be timed, so after a certain number of seconds, it won't be usable again. But because we have to send it, the same pass tickets built for both the primary and secondary HMC, you'll need to disable that so that we can do that connection without an issue. All right, the next one I want to talk about is involving our scheduled tasks. So one of the actions with a scheduled task is called run external script. What that does is allow you to set up a external call to where CSM will SSH to another server or even the same server, but will SSH to it and run a script outside of the CSM server itself. And what can you do with this? You could use it to call an application script that will quiesce the database, so you can take a backup and then call another script to restart the database, or you could call it to run a batch job in coordination with another suspend and recovery of CSM. There's a infinite number of things you can do with this run external script call and manage your environment. Now, with that said, there were some things that customers didn't necessarily like. One thing was if you have multiple of these scheduled tasks with a run external script and they're all calling the same server, each of those scheduled tasks have to define those credentials. So if a password changes, you'd have to go into each of those scheduled tasks and change the password. It's kind of a pain to manage it that way. The second thing was customers didn't like having to put a static password in there. They wanted to be able to set up these SSH connections using what they call SSH keys. And so with the 6.3.11 release, we covered both those issues. The first thing we did was separate the definition of the external server into its own entity. So if you click on external server connections, you can now define a server connection for a particular server. So if you have server 1, you can define it as a user ID password or an SSH key connection, but it's a single instance of the connection so that that same connection can be used across multiple scheduled tasks. So when you go in and create this run actions script, you only have to define that server connection once. You just hit the select server button, select the one you want, and then you can use it across multiple scheduled tasks, making it easier. So if you use the user ID and password mechanism and the password changed, you would only have to go into the external server connections, modify that server, change the password once. You don't have to do it across all the tasks anymore. As I mentioned there, when you define that server, you can also define it to connect via an SSH key. So how does this work? When you do that, you'll specify the user you want to connect with, but also the operating system that server is. So Windows, Linux or AX or ZOS, you'll define that operating system, and when you save that, CSM will internally create that SSH key pair that we store within the CSM server. So now, once that server definition is defined, you'll click on that server from our select server panel or external server connections panel and select that server and do an export key pair. You'll export that key to a file and then put that file on the server that CSM will be SSHing to and convert it to a public key and put that into the server so that when CSM makes that SSH connection, it will be able to use the key instead. There's documented in Knowledge Center how to do all those steps. Recommend go looking at that, but this will hopefully help so that you don't have to use a password anymore. You could just use those SSH key pairs. One thing I want to note here is that we also added a little bit of protection in here because anytime you select a server, you will, and save that scheduled task, that action, you will be prompted for the server's password still. So even if you had an SSH key pair connection defined, you will be asked for the password so that we know in CSM that you have authorization to create a scheduled task that will call a script on that server. So you must have the authentication there, even though it's an SSH key, but only when you're setting up and defining that scheduled task. When the scheduled task runs, it's not going to use any user ID password. We don't store the user ID and password if it's an SSH connection, SSH key connection. It's just there so we know that you can create that scheduled task because you have authorization to that server itself. All right, this last one I'm really excited about. It's something that customers have been asking for a long time, involving our active and standby support. So today, hopefully most of you are aware that we have an active and standby server support that allows you to sync two servers so that in the event that you lose your active CSM server, you can do a takeover on the standby and keep up and do your recovery actions from there. The issue was, for the longest time, is that if a disconnect occurs, say you rebooted the active server because of maintenance or an IP network hiccup occurred, if those two servers disconnected, someone would manually have to come in and reconnect the servers. The reason we had this philosophy is because we didn't know what caused the disconnection. So we didn't want a corrupted active server to automatically sync with the standby and now corrupt the standby. So now you have two corrupted servers and no way out. Well, we took care of that with this solution. So now with 6.3.11, I'll start with saying we will now auto connect after a disconnect. So anytime we have a disconnection, the active server, when it's up, will attempt to reconnect to the standby, assuming that there's a definition for a disconnected consistent standby server. We will attempt to reconnect to the standby every minute for 10 tries, so about every 10 minutes. If we cannot reconnect after that period, you will have to manually reconnect, and you can call support to kind of change those values if you need to, but that's the default, every minute for 10 tries. If we're able to reconnect in one of those tries, before the active and standby server actually sync, the standby server will take an auto backup. So we now have the ability to auto backup the CSM servers, if you weren't aware of that. And so the standby server will auto backup its brains into a zip file on that server, do the sync, and then that way, if there was corruption and the standby got corrupted, you could always restore the servers to that zip, that backup image. The other thing I want to talk about is if a takeover occurs. So say you had a real disaster, active server's down, you were forced to do a takeover on the standby server. Well, what happens when the active comes back up and it tries to auto reconnect? Well, the active server will see that a takeover was done on the standby and will stop attempting to do the reconnect. So we'll try that once, stop, and then that will allow you to now define the original active as the standby to reverse the direction of the syncing. So we cover the takeover case. The other thing I want to cover is the upgrade. So we document in Knowledge Center the steps to upgrade. It's very important to follow these now with the auto reconnect, because part of that recommendation is always to do a takeover on your standby server. So by doing the takeover on the standby server, you're going to prevent, say you upgraded your active server, it's going to prevent that active server from attempting to reconnect to the standby at a different level than the standby server. So because you're going to have to upgrade them one at a time, right? And so that takeover step is important to prevent this auto reconnect from attempting to reconnect things. So very excited about this feature. We have some additional features coming up in the next, hopefully the next release or two, involving active and standby, in particular around the takeover and not having two active servers after the takeover. Just leave you with that. But excited about that as well. So hopefully this helps you keep a much more highly available environment by not having to be there manually, not having to be online when a disconnect occurs. You can rest assured that it will auto reconnect or attempt to auto reconnect. All right, with that said, open ideas. These are the new RFEs. We constantly look at this. I say this every time, but we constantly look at these. I constantly look at votes. Go look out what's there already, what other customers have asked for. Vote for them. I look at the votes, and it helps me really prioritize the CSM work, and we try to really listen to our customers. So please use the idea portal. Take advantage of it. With that said, thank you. Thank you for your time, and hopefully you enjoy the features in this new release.